April 15, 1943, 25,000 feet above the Belgian coast. Oberleutnant Hermann Keller of Jagdgeschwader 26 watched the unfamiliar shapes drawing closer from the west, enormous single-engine fighters bearing no resemblance to anything in his identification manual. His combat report, filed away in the Bundesarchiv military archive, captured the instant German pilots encountered Republic P-47 Thunderbolts in actual combat. Heavy fighters appearing at altitudes American aircraft shouldn't reach, roughly a dozen machines holding tight formation above 7,000 meters. What Keller saw unfolding before him would stay with Luftwaffe pilots throughout the war's remaining years. The leading American fighter suddenly unleashed what seemed like continuous streams of fire. Not the familiar 4 or 6 gunbursts, but 8 coordinated torrents of heavy ammunition creating a focused cone of devastation unlike anything in German fighting tactics. His wingman's Focke-Wulf 190 absorbed roughly 40 rounds in barely 2 seconds. The machine didn't catch fire or explode, it simply disintegrated, torn to pieces by the relentless impact of 50-caliber armor-piercing rounds. Major Donald Blake of the 4th Fighter Group had just claimed the P-47's first aerial kill, introducing the Luftwaffe to American firepower philosophy. Republic P-47 Thunderbolts carried 8 Browning M2 50-caliber machine guns, each pumping out 800 rounds per minute. Combined, they spewed 6,400 rounds skyward every 60 seconds, over 100 bullets per second. Equipped with 350 rounds per gun, a P-47 could sustain this devastating barrage for roughly 33 seconds of continuous firing. The whole mathematics of fighter combat had shifted fundamentally. This collision represented 2 completely opposing design approaches. The Luftwaffe went to war convinced that cannon armament held the future. Their primary fighter weapon, the 20mm MG-150-120, launched explosive shells capable of downing an aircraft with very few impacts. German pilots drilled constantly in deflection shooting, taking pride in their precision, 1 or 2 well-placed cannon shells to bring down an opponent. Major Günther Rahl, destined to become history's 3rd highest-scoring ace with 275 victories, explained the German thinking in post-war remarks. Machine guns seemed obsolete to us. Cannons represented real progress in fighter armament. A skilled pilot simply needed accurate placement of those explosive shells. This represented aerial combat as a precise discipline. The American approach embodied industrial warfare concepts applied to air fighting. Instead of relying on pilot accuracy for targeted hits, the P-47's 8-gun cluster created a blanket of fire. At typical engagement ranges of 200 to 300 yards, the convergence pattern produced a lethal rectangle measuring roughly 8 by 12 feet, inside which no aircraft could endure. Colonel Robert S. Johnson, eventually scoring 27 kills flying P-47s with the 56th Fighter Group, outlined the American approach. We weren't after surgical strikes, we were throwing overwhelming firepower downrange. Every trigger squeeze aimed for guaranteed destruction through sheer volume instead of accuracy. The numbers painted a stark picture of this firepower contrast. A P-47 Thunderbolt carried 2,800 rounds total, 350 per gun across 8 weapons. Each armor-piercing round weighed 1.71 ounces. In a standard 15-second burst, a P-47 sent over 1,600 rounds downrange, translating to 171 pounds of metal and explosive force. Meanwhile, a Bf-109G hauled 150 rounds for its single 20mm cannon, plus twin 30mm machine guns, carrying 300 rounds apiece. The sustained firepower gap grew even wider. A German fighter could keep its cannon firing roughly 6 to 7 seconds maximum before ammunition ran dry. A P-47 could unleash devastating barrages repeatedly throughout a battle, carrying sufficient ammunition for multiple engagements. The initial major clash between P-47s and German fighters had actually come on March 10, 1943, when the 4th Fighter Group flew the type on its first combat mission over France. That mission turned into a complete disaster. Radio failures prevented any contact with enemy aircraft, and every plane returned safely to base untouched. The Germans never discovered what they'd narrowly escaped meeting. What German pilots hadn't anticipated was that the P-47 had been purpose-built for high-altitude superiority. The enormous Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp, fitted with its advanced turbo supercharger, pumped out 2,300 horsepower at altitudes where German engines gasped for breath. At 25,000 feet where B-17 streams operated, the P-47 preserved performance German fighters simply couldn't achieve. Luftwaffe doctrine favored battles below 20,000 feet, where their machines performed most effectively. The Bf-109G, powered by its Daimler-Benz DB605 engine, even with MW50 methanol injection boosting power, faltered terribly, maintaining thrust at extreme heights. The Focke-Wulf FW-190A, murderous at medium altitudes, became sluggish climbing above 22,000 feet. Major Egon Meyer, leading 3, JG2, and credited with pioneering head-on attacks against bomber formations, recorded his assessment. Above 7,500 meters, everything shifts favorably for the Thunderbolts. They maneuver freely while we wrestle with controls that feel locked solid. They strike from higher up without fear, unleash their horrible firepower, then escape upward before we can respond. By mid-1943, Republic Aviation's manufacturing capacity startled German intelligence once accurate reports reached Berlin. The Farmingdale plant, plus a freshly opened facility in Evansville, Indiana, was hitting production figures that seemed unbelievable. At maximum capacity, Republic pumped out 840 P-47s monthly, 28 aircraft every single day. The Evansville plant ultimately produced 6,242 Thunderbolts. German fighter production peaked at 2,177 aircraft monthly in September 1944, divided among multiple models. Republic's single aircraft type nearly equaled half of Germany's complete fighter manufacturing. One American firm was practically matching the fighter production capacity of the entire German state. Oberst Joseph Priller, Geschwader Commodore of JG-26, initially dismissed intelligence reports of American production as defeatist hysteria. After facing progressively larger P-47 formations throughout 1943, he retrieved those same reports and added his notes. If anything, these numbers sound conservative. We're confronting industrial warfare at magnitude we never imagined possible. The production difference extended far beyond raw aircraft counts. Every P-47 required 17,891 separate components, assembled through mass manufacturing techniques. The 8 Browning M2 machine guns alone cost more than numerous complete German fighters. Yet America constructed 15,686 P-47s across the whole war, positioning it among the most produced American fighters. August 17, 1943, during the opening Schweinfurt raid, gave German pilots their complete introduction to P-47 capabilities. Thunderbolts escorted B-17s penetrating deep into Reich territory using belly tanks, a first for long-range escort. JG-1 and JG-26, anticipating unescorted bombers after the Little Friends reached their standard range limit, instead collided with 240 P-47s, maintaining close protective formation. The resulting engagements saw concentrated P-47 firepower tearing through German formations. Hauptmann Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland of JG-26 reported, "Those Thunderbolt guns don't simply wound aircraft, they obliterate them. We watched skilled pilots just vanish inside clouds of wreckage. No opportunity jumping out, no possibility of living, pure instant destruction from concentrated fire." The shock hit immediately. German pilots who'd crafted careful tactics for meeting Allied fighters suddenly faced an opponent that negated their methods. Rather than maneuver-seeking position, P-47 pilots could merely aim their airplane and vaporize the target via firepower flooding. P-47 pilots quickly perfected tactics, leveraging their advantages. Most lethal was the high-altitude diving attack. Plunging from 30,000 feet at speeds approaching 500 miles per hour, pouring concentrated fire downward, then climbing back skyward using accumulated speed. Germans termed these strikes death from above, having discovered no effective defense. The physics of energy management enormously favored the P-47. A Thunderbolt dropping from 30,000 feet to 15,000 feet accumulated kinetic power sufficient for climbing back to 25,000 feet without maximum throttle. German fighters struggling initially just reaching those heights couldn't dominate this vertical theater. The P-47's size, initially seeming a drawback, actually proved advantageous during these dives. At 14,000 pounds loaded, Thunderbolts accelerated diving faster than any German machine could match. Luftwaffe pilots attempting escape through diving found P-47s catching and overtaking them, delivering punishing bursts throughout the pursuit. The P-47's ammunition supply functioned as psychological terror beyond numbers alone. Carrying 350 rounds per gun, American pilots possessed tactical flexibility Germans couldn't fathom. They fired ranging shots, walked fire gradually onto targets, engaged multiple adversaries throughout single missions. German pilots hauling 150 to 200 rounds for their primary cannon operated under perpetual ammunition pressure. Every burst meant careful calculation. Wasteful fire meant squandering precious resources. This ammunition gap bred a fundamental imbalance in combat thinking. Americans battled from plenty, while Germans battled from want. Manufacturing figures backing this disparity stunned observers. The Lake City Ordnance Plant in Missouri produced approximately 6.5 billion rounds of 50 caliber ammunition across the war. This single factory's output could theoretically furnish every P-47 constructed with over 400,000 rounds, sufficient for roughly 140 complete ammunition loads per plane. D-Day, June 6, 1944, demonstrated ultimate P-47 supremacy. The Luftwaffe managed just 319 sorties over Normandy that entire day. The 9th Air Force flew above 2,000 P-47 sorties solo. German pilots reaching the invasion sector encountered American fighter formations of staggering density. The numbers devastated morale. German airmen faced odds exceeding 20 to 1. Combat meetings pitted them against concentrated firepower that rendered traditional dogfighting impossible. The Luftwaffe surrendered 35 aircraft that day. P-47s registered 27 victories. Ground attack missions brought additional agony. P-47s equipped with ordnance devastated German reinforcement columns trying reaching Normandy. But the 8-gun strafing runs created particular dread. A solitary P-47 could demolish an entire motor column in one pass. Concentrated fire penetrating metal, wrecking motors, annihilating personnel with mechanized savagery. By fall 1944, the Luftwaffe confronted a compounded catastrophe. Fresh pilots joined squadrons carrying merely 10 hours of fighter experience, opposing American pilots boasting 200-plus combat sorties. Technological superiority merged with disastrous training inadequacy, producing slaughter masquerading as battle. German replacement pilots hurled into combat barely prepared met P-47s, whose 8 guns rendered pilot expertise almost irrelevant. Even mediocrely aimed bursts saturated sufficient space guaranteeing impacts. Seasoned Luftwaffe training officers reported whole training groups annihilated facing Thunderbolts initially. Statistics portrayed the disaster breadth. German pilots beginning instruction after June 1944 experienced below 15% survival odds, completing 5 combat missions. Specifically battling P-47s, survival rates plummeted beneath 10%. Whole squadrons got eliminated single engagements, succeeded by even greener pilots lasting minutes longer. Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's dawn attack targeting Allied airfields January 1, 1945, illustrated total air superiority reversal. Despite achieving operational surprise and destroying parked aircraft, withdrawal losses approached catastrophe levels. As German fighters headed homeward following their bombing runs, waves of P-47s launched from rear bases. Lacking altitude benefit or ammunition reserves for prolonged fighting, Luftwaffe machines systematically perished. The 365th Fighter Group's P-47s scrambling from Metz pursuing the initial assault discovered German formations at low altitude and methodically destroyed whole squadrons. The operation squandered 271 Luftwaffe aircraft and 143 dead pilots, casualties from which recovery proved impossible. American air combat losses totaled 16 machines. The kill-to-loss proportion exceeded documented records, presenting absolute American firepower superiority. Even jet fighter introduction offered merely fleeting P-47 respite. Jets outpaced Thunderbolts horizontally, remaining exposed, climbing and descending. P-47 pilots devised procedures positioning themselves near jet airfields, awaiting vulnerable moments. 8 guns' concentrated power destroyed jets equally well as conventional fighters when brought under fire. Jet speed meant nothing, encountering low altitude with landing apparatus down. Some of Germany's most irreplaceable jet pilots fell to P-47 Thunderbolts during these critical moments, though Walter Newtony wasn't among them. On November 8, 1944, he found himself shot down by P-51 Mustangs, a fact often lost to history, which frequently misreports the encounter as involving P-47s instead. The raw production numbers painted a stark picture of American manufacturing might. Republic Aviation produced 15,686 P-47s across the entire conflict. At the height of production, the factories churned out 840 aircraft every single month. Each Thunderbolt bristled with 8 Browning M2 machine guns, which meant 125,488 guns total across the entire production run. American ammunition factories manufactured over 12 billion rounds of 0.50 caliber ammunition, enough to keep every P-47 supplied with virtually endless combat loads. Germany couldn't match this output. The entire German fighter production from 1939 to 1945 reached only about 33,000 aircraft across all types. Ammunition shortages dogged German pilots constantly, forcing many to fly with partial loads. By 1945, fuel scarcity had become catastrophic. Combat missions lasted only 15 to 20 minutes, while P-47 pilots could stay aloft for 2 full hours. The cumulative impact on German pilots approached psychological breaking point. Luftwaffe medical officers observed what they called Thunderbolt neurosis, involuntary panic responses triggered by any sound resembling 8 synchronized machine guns firing at once. Veterans of repeated P-47 encounters showed symptoms matching those of soldiers exposed to artillery bombardment. Those who survived developed survival-focused tactics rather than offensive strategies. They learned to engage only damaged or isolated prey. Combat above 20,000 feet meant certain disadvantage since P-47s dominated that altitude. Head-on attacks against 8 guns became unthinkable. The moment Thunderbolts appeared, the only sensible response was immediate disengagement. These weren't winning tactics, they were survival tactics. Major Günther Rau accumulated 275 victories and lived through the war, offering invaluable insight into confronting the P-47. During an attack on May 12, 1944, he lost his left thumb when P-47s from the 56th Fighter Group, led by Hub Zemke, hit his aircraft. In later interviews, Rau explained that the P-47 maintained superior speed at altitude and dove considerably faster than the Bf-109. Pilots had learned to respect not merely the aircraft, but the underlying philosophy of firepower it represented. General Adolf Galland, credited with 104 victories, addressed the psychological dimension in his post-war memoirs. The 8 guns of the P-47 announced something fundamental about American strategy. America would achieve victory through excess, not through efficiency. Every burst from those 8 guns carried a message. It said, "We possess such abundance that we can waste it destroying you." That message proved more psychologically destructive than physical damage alone could have been. Even Johannes Steinhoff, who survived the war to become a NATO commander with 176 victories, recognized this fundamental shift in warfare's nature. His extensive service with JG-26, JG-77, and JG-7 exposed him repeatedly to American firepower doctrine. Beyond aerial combat, the P-47 devastated German forces when conducting ground attack missions. Those 8 guns that shredded aircraft proved equally lethal against vehicles, trains, and concentrated troop formations. A single pass from a P-47 could render a locomotive inoperable, the concentrated gunfire penetrating boiler plates that resisted cannon rounds. Veterans of the Eastern Front, hardened through years of Soviet combat, collapsed under P-47 strafing assaults. The distinctive roar of 8 guns firing simultaneously became the sound of inevitable death. Vehicle columns caught in P-47 attacks simply ceased to exist as organized units, becoming instead burning wreckage stretching across miles of countryside. By early 1945, the new P-47M and P-47N variants widened the already vast gap between American and German capabilities. The P-47M's Pratt & Whitney R2800 57C engine generated 2,800 horsepower with water injection, achieving speeds beyond 470 miles per hour. Only 130 of these variants were manufactured, yet they represented the pinnacle of piston engine fighter development. The K-14 computing gun sight, standard equipment on late production P-47s, eliminated the last German advantage, the superior deflection shooting skill many veteran pilots possessed. This gun sight automatically calculated lead based on target range and movement. Combined with 8 guns, this technology transformed even novice pilots into deadly marksmen. Germany's fuel catastrophe by late 1944 created a synergistic disaster when opposing P-47s. German pilots, restricted to minimal training fuel, encountered American pilots with vast flight experience. The skill disparity joined with technological inequality to create engagements that barely deserved the name combat. German pilots operated in constant anxiety about fuel, calculating whether they possessed enough to engage and still return safely. P-47 pilots, blessed with abundant fuel supplies, could afford patience, altitude changes, and extended pursuit. This fuel advantage meant Germans fought defensively, while Americans maintained offensive control throughout each encounter. The war's conclusion brought statistical clarity regarding the P-47's contribution. In the European theater, P-47s earned credit for 3,152 air-to-air victories. The ground attack tally exceeded 86,000 railway cars destroyed or damaged, 9,000 locomotives destroyed, 68,000 motor vehicles destroyed, and 6,000 armored vehicles claimed. Against this, approximately 3,499 P-47s were lost to all causes, 1,020 to enemy fighters, and 2,479 to flak and operational losses. The aerial combat exchange ratio exceeded 4-1, demonstrating unmistakable superiority. The depth of German psychological trauma from P-47s became evident during the Korean War, when West German military advisors consulted with NATO. Viewing footage of F-84 Thunderjets conducting strafing attacks, several veteran pilots displayed stress responses, revealing lasting wartime scars. The German advisors conveyed crucial lessons to NATO planners. They emphasized that American firepower doctrine, overwhelming abundance rather than surgical precision, had proven psychologically devastating. They urged understanding that America didn't pursue fair fights, but rather industrial annihilation of opposition. In April 1945, the Luftwaffe's final operational assessment acknowledged total defeat by American industrial warfare. The assessment recognized that traditional fighter combat, based on pilot skill and maneuverability, had become obsolete, rendered irrelevant by overwhelming firepower. The 8 guns hadn't merely shot down aircraft, they had destroyed an entire combat philosophy. German pilots had commenced the war as aerial knights, believing in individual mastery and precision. They concluded it with the bitter knowledge that modern warfare belonged to industrial powers capable of mass-producing overwhelming firepower. The P-47, with its 8 0.50 caliber machine guns, had become the instrument of this harsh education. Post-war military analysis confirmed the P-47's decisive influence on aerial warfare. The 8-gun armament signified more than mere firepower. It embodied American industrial philosophy applied to destruction. Where Germany pursued efficiency and precision, America delivered overwhelming abundance. Dr. Williamson Murray observed in his air war analysis that the P-47's 8 guns democratized air combat. Individual skill became secondary to industrial production capacity. German aces possessing hundreds of combat hours found themselves equivalent to American novices when facing walls of 0.50 caliber fire. The psychological impact extended beyond individual pilots into German military doctrine itself. The Wehrmacht had pioneered combined arms warfare, Yet American industrial capacity, symbolized by the P-47's excessive firepower, proved that production capability trumped tactical innovation. The manufacturing transformation behind the P-47 illustrated American industrial mobilization's magnitude. Republic Aviation evolved from a modest enterprise producing 39 aircraft in 1939 to manufacturing 840 monthly by 1944. This single company's expansion surpassed the entire growth of German fighter production. The Evansville plant, constructed from raw land in 1942, employed 28,000 workers at peak operations, with 40% being women. Many possessed no prior industrial experience, yet they assembled fighters with such quality that mechanical failure losses remained negligible throughout the conflict. Every P-47 contained 305,000 individual rivets installed using pneumatic guns that didn't exist in most German factories. Assembly line efficiency enabled workers to complete major sections in hours, work requiring days in German facilities. This production efficiency translated directly into numerical advantage across European skies. The ammunition supporting P-47 operations demonstrated American logistical dominance. Beyond the 12 billion rounds produced at Lake City, additional facilities in St. Louis, Denver, and Salt Lake City manufactured billions more. This ammunition abundance meant P-47 pilots never experienced the ammunition anxiety plaguing German opponents. American logistics delivered ammunition worldwide, ensuring P-47 squadrons never faced shortages. Forward airfields in France received daily ammunition deliveries exceeding what German squadrons received monthly. This logistical superiority guaranteed every P-47 sortie launched with complete ammunition loads, while German fighters increasingly flew partial loads. America's pilot training produced continuous streams of qualified P-47 pilots. By 1944, the United States trained 100,000 pilots annually through extensive programs specific to P-47 operations. These pilots arrived at combat units possessing 200-plus flight hours, including 50-plus hours in their specific aircraft. German pilot training collapsed from 250 pre-war hours to fewer than 50 hours by 1944. Many German pilots fired their weapons for the first time during actual combat. This training disparity, combined with P-47 firepower advantages, created encounters resembling execution rather than aerial combat. The P-47's influence extended far beyond World War II statistics. The 8-gun armament philosophy shaped American military doctrine throughout the Cold War. The emphasis on overwhelming firepower rather than precision became ingrained in American military thinking. German officers joining NATO brought hard-earned lessons about opposing American firepower. They stressed that the P-47's 8 guns had taught them that modern warfare fundamentally concerned industrial capacity. Nations capable of mass-producing overwhelming firepower would defeat those depending on individual warrior excellence. The pilot survival rate differential revealed the air war's fundamental inequality. American P-47 pilots completing their tours possessed roughly 90% survival rates. German fighter pilots confronting P-47s experienced less than 30% survival rates through 1944 to 1945. This gap reflected not courage or skill differences, but mathematical reality when facing overwhelming firepower. Young German pilots with perhaps 10 combat hours confronted American veterans with hundreds of flight hours flying aircraft, carrying 8 heavy machine guns. The outcome was predetermined by industrial mathematics rather than individual capacity. The Luftwaffe's pilot corps wasn't defeated, it was systematically eliminated. The P-47's strategic impact transcended tactical victories. By achieving air superiority over Europe, P-47s enabled bombing campaigns destroying German industrial capacity. They escorted bombers eliminating German fuel production, creating the exact shortages crippling Luftwaffe operations. Most significantly, P-47 ground attack missions paralyzed German military movements. The Wehrmacht's inability to move in daylight without catastrophic losses from strafing P-47s fundamentally altered operational possibilities. The Normandy campaign succeeded partly because German reinforcements couldn't traverse P-47-dominated skies. In post-war German military culture, the P-47 became synonymous with American material superiority. Veterans employed Thunderbolt mentality, describing overwhelming force application. Military education emphasized that future conflicts demanded matching American industrial capacity, not merely tactical excellence. The phrase 8 guns entered German military vocabulary as shorthand for insurmountable firepower superiority. Staff college studies examined how traditional martial excellence became irrelevant confronting industrial-scale firepower. The P-47 had taught German military professionals that modern warfare was ultimately economic rather than heroic. German pilots confronting P-47 Thunderbolts with their 8 0.50 caliber machine guns experienced surprise. But that surprise reflected deeper misunderstanding about modern warfare's essential nature. They had entered combat believing quality transcended quantity. Skill surpassed production. Precision defeated saturation. The P-47 taught them through brutal experience that industrial democracy's capacity to mass-produce overwhelming firepower exceeded totalitarian efficiency. Every P-47 encounter reinforced a single truth. America had transformed warfare from individual combat into industrial processing. The 15,686 P-47s produced, their 125,488 machine guns, and billions of ammunition rounds represented more than military superiority. They embodied a production philosophy equipping every fighter with twice the necessary firepower because industrial abundance made such excess economically feasible. German pilots absorbed this lesson through the harshest means. Daily encounters with American fighters destroying them utterly, repeatedly, almost casually. The 8 guns didn't merely establish air superiority over Europe. They demonstrated that in industrial warfare's age, the productive capacity greatest would always prevail. German pilot surprise ultimately reflected surprise at modern warfare's true nature. They had prepared for aerial duels and encountered instead an industrial machine processing them with 8 guns, firing over 100 rounds per second. Those converging streams of tracer fire contained the entire World War II story. America's ability to produce overwhelming force and deliver it anywhere required. The German pilots surviving learned they had faced not simply superior aircraft, but superior production philosophy. The P-47 Thunderbolt, with its 8 0.50 caliber machine guns, embodied democracy's response to totalitarianism. Not through ideology, but through industrial mathematics, no courage or skill could overcome. Eventually, German pilot surprise transformed into understanding. They had encountered the future of warfare, and it possessed 8 guns delivering American industrial supremacy, one devastating burst at a time.